origin of life, and a callback to Star Trek: The Next Generation.
What does it all mean? Why are we here? What is our purpose?
Those topics and more in today's BioTrekkie with the Admiral, starting now. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to BioTrekkie with the Admiral. I'm Mohamed Noor. I'm a biology professor at Duke University, and I'm an occasional science consultant for the Star Trek universe.
And I'm Jayne Brook. I played Admiral Katrina Cornwell on the first two seasons of Star Trek Discovery, and we are here to talk with you today about season 5. I can't believe it, episodes 1 and 2, the final season. So this is BioTrekkie with the Admiral, so all things biology. Mohammed, can you outline for us three main topics that jumped out at you in the first episode of season 5? And we'll talk about that.
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you. So in the first episode, obviously the concept of the origin of life and how did, as you've said in the intro, how did we get here? I mean, that's obviously a big topic for research in general. I then thought about the concept of panspermia, which is actually what that Next Generation episode is about. This is essentially this idea that life on Earth was seeded with elements or actual life from outer space. And the last part was something about the sort of iridescent bacteria. I just thought it'd be fun to dive in and talk about those a little bit more.
Okay, so great. So Mohammed, could you expand upon the first point that you just modeled for us?
Sure thing. So origin of life is obviously a massive topic. Now, when we think about life on Earth, I mean, there's obviously an array of organisms when you go out there. You see all sorts of plants, animals, fungi, protists, bacteria, things like that. All life on Earth had one single origin. And we'll come back to the space connections in a minute. And we know it had one single origin. There's a ton of evidence for it, and that all life on Earth is actually related. And I mean physically related in the sense that we share direct ancestors with bacteria, with grass, with things like that. And literally, if you go far enough back, that I have an ancestor that is also an ancestor for grass. You have an ancestor that is also an ancestor for grass. Things like that, which is kind of a shocking thing to think about. But something happened to make that first life form arise, something like 4 billion years ago. And if you think about it, half the time between then and now, life on Earth was basically, microscopic, a single cell, things like that. So one of the big questions that people have studied for a long time, for decades, is how did this come about? Now, one popular idea is that there was this sort of primordial soup here on Earth. So obviously there wasn't oxygen and things like that in the atmosphere, but you had other sorts of things happening. You had volcanic activity, and some unlikely set of chemical reactions led to something that was actually able to reproduce here on Earth, and that was the first life. Now, we don't have time machines, unlike Next Generation, where they could just, snap their fingers and go back in time and see what happened. That actually happened in the finale of Next Generation. We can't do that, unfortunately. So what scientists have tried to do sometimes, and this dates back to some experiments from the 1950s by Miller and Urey, is they tried to recreate the conditions for that and see if they could create, not necessarily create life, but create things that could have been associated with the origin of life. So there's experiments where they replicate ancient conditions with like ammonia and hydrogen, things like that, and they added electricity. And what they found was they saw some formation of amino acids and other sorts of building blocks. So that doesn't prove that that's what happened here on Earth, but it's at least one possible explanation for how you could have ended up getting that sort of life here on Earth. Maybe. There's others as well. I mean, some people think hydrothermal vents are where it's at. So if you go in the deep sea, there's these super hot hydrothermal vents that are spewing out hot stuff. Maybe that caused some melting off of some minerals down there, and that led to it. And last but not least, well, not last, there's probably a lot of explanations for this, but one other interesting one is this idea of panspermia, that something came from outer space that helped seed life here on Earth. And that's not necessarily a crazy idea, in that we have seen from, for example, meteorites that have crashed on Earth, we have seen some amino acids suggesting there are extraterrestrially formed amino acids. So maybe something was missing and it just arrived at the right time from a meteor. Maybe. I mean, we can't rule that out, right? So, oh,
Yes.
please.
No, I love this idea or this scientific fact that every single living thing, flora and fauna, are related. I mean, that's just you go and Star Trek writers do go, but that goes to a very philosophical place and a very um, profound. We'll talk about it more later, but a very profound place about how we're all related and how we need to care, you know, for
Completely
everything.
agree. Completely agree. And that's probably part of what spurred on this idea of the episode from Next Generation, which was referenced here, the episode called The Chase. I think it was season 6, I believe, right? Of Next Generation.
Right. It's season 6, episode 20.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it was. So that episode's interesting because it suggests this sort of panspermia idea, but there it was very directed panspermia in the sense that these ancient organisms, which it's interesting in the original episode, they never actually called them the progenitors. They just never referred to a species name. So I think progenitors actually came from, I think that name came from like a video game, actually, because in the original series, there was something like it and they called it the preservers. And then here in Next Generation, they just didn't refer to it. So it's interesting that now it's progenitors, which matches, I think, Star Trek Online or some other games like that. So anyway, that's just a random Trek trivia there. But it's interesting,
Yeah.
this idea that something had intentionally seeded life on these other worlds. Now, I give a talk about this a lot, and it's a neat idea just in the sense of saying that, like, yes, it's based on a real world concept. The tough thing about it is this idea that the likelihood of you ending up with a bunch of humanoids at the end is incredibly unlikely, mostly because there's so many random chance events that led to us here on Earth. So just as one example, 65 million years ago, we had an asteroid impact on Earth that knocked back the dinosaurs, and that led to, diversification of mammals on Earth. Did that happen on Cardassia and on Kronos and on all these other different planets too? That, it's
Oh,
not like if you have 4 billion years of evolution from any life, you just end up with humanoids, right? So that there's a
true.
stretch there at least.
But then explain to us what is I mean, you can't explain in 2 seconds, but the simplest explanation for why the humanoid form was created on Earth. I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
an
the
explanation
consequence
for
of
that?
lots of natural selection and random chance events over the course of billions of years. So, I mean, I just mentioned one random chance event that probably, if that asteroid impact hadn't knocked back the dinosaurs, we probably wouldn't have had humanoids. There's other random chance events too. If you go back further still, the origin of mitochondria, right? So, the mitochondria, as you might remember, the powerhouses of cells in every cell. So, that originated from this process where one single-celled organism swallowed another, and the smaller one produced energy that the larger one used. And when it divided, the other one divided inside it, and that eventually led to the mitochondria, which we have today. And that helped power this idea of becoming multicellular. Again, did that happen on all these other worlds? Now, when I've presented this, some people who are good statisticians will say, well, maybe these progenitors, preservers, whatever they're called, maybe they seeded like trillions of other worlds, such that even if it's unlikely, you still could end up with. My counter to that is, yeah, but they have to be rocky planets in the Goldilocks zone, the right distance from their star. I don't know there are that many of those in this particular quadrant of the Milky Way. I don't know if there are enough to do that you would end up with so many humanoids. There may not be enough.
Now, this might be a thick question, but why could you not have had humanoids without that asteroid hitting Earth?
Because prior to that, I mean, what happened was there were tons of dinosaurs on the planet. Basically,
Yeah.
they were killing off a lot of the larger mammals.
Oh, so we would be eaten. That's why.
Yeah, yeah.
Unless we figured out, as we did, how to work together to kill the dinosaur and have a lot of meat. I don't know. That's what we.
Well, we didn't overlap with dinosaurs. There were no human dinosaur overlap in time. I think most of these
Oh, I
dinosaurs
know.
died back
But
on
they
their own.
kept living and there wasn't an asteroid. I don't know.
Yeah. Actually, to be clear, there are still some dinosaurs around. We just now call them birds.
There are, and I've got lizards all over my yard, and they look like little dinosaurs. And
They do. They do.
I've actually got, and you could speak to this, but this is so off topic. I've got barn owls. I've got wonderful barn owls and being born in a barn owl box. There's 7 babies this year, and I've got wildlife photographer comes in, with a camera and films them, and oh my God, they look like dinosaurs when
Oh
they're baby.
yeah. They're terrifying
Well,
too.
they're,
Like,
they're,
look at
I
their
mean,
claws. They're owls.
they look bizarre when they're born. They're so beautiful
Yeah.
later. They look
Yeah.
bizarre. They're prehistoric.
Oh yeah.
So, well, um, they did try to explain that in the Next Generation season 6, episode 20, where she said, we've made you all to look like us. And that was kind of a way of explaining why Star Trek has so many humanoids. And then the practical explanation, which we've talked about, is that actors are usually humans. So
Usually.
they're usually, uh, you know, they can usually look sort of humanoid. Um,
Actually, I liked something you said in an earlier one of our episodes too. You commented that by looking humanoid, they're more sympathetic and we will relate to them more too as well, which I thought was an excellent point. I hadn't thought of it before, but I remember
that's
you mentioned it in one of our earlier podcasts.
right. I remember that. That's a story, a story point when you're telling stories to
Yeah.
humans that it would make them be able to relate better. And so that's the origin topic. And then what was the second topic
Oh,
that you
panspermia, which I kind of bled the two into each other. So again, panspermia is a possibility. There's different forms of panspermia out there. So one would be literally just like dropping a bacterium or some other sort of primitive life here on Earth. Maybe that happened. I mean, we can't rule that out. I mean, again, unless we rewind the tape of time, we can't actually see whether that actually occurred. The other thing is there's something called pseudo-panspermia, and that could be that some of the raw materials that were necessary for life actually came from an asteroid or meteor impact or something like that. And that basically that helped seed it. Now, the interesting about panspermia, and this connects, of course, very tightly with the chase, is that then could happen on multiple other worlds. Like again, if there's these bits floating through space, it could land here and it could land on some star around Proxima, or sorry, on some planet around Proxima Centauri. Maybe then that happened to have similar conditions and life arose there too. It lends this interesting kind of
Mhm.
hope that maybe we'll find similar life.
Yeah, it's like seeding the universe.
Yeah,
It's basically seeding, building
yeah.
gardens everywhere.
Maybe from
Interesting.
comets, maybe from anything. I mean, we don't really know. I mean, the possibilities are huge. And realistically, even if there is life out there, there could be a whole bunch of different kinds of origins. Maybe some of them are seeded by, comet bits or meteor bits or things like that, and some just arise in situ. I mean, it doesn't have to be one possible. It doesn't have to be one single explanation. But the nice thing for this is it does suggest all those humanoids on Star Trek are, as you said, very related. Now, one thing it doesn't suggest is it doesn't suggest the non-humanoids are related. So the thing there is like the Horta from the original series, that big silicon-based thing. It may not have been seeded by the progenitors. It may be just its own thing. So,
So this leads me to an overall question to you, Mohammed, as a
please.
scientist and talking about all of this. Do you feel, I mean, you can't speak for but science in general, do you feel, and this will be a topic in our conversation at some point on these episodes, the search continues for answers by physicists, was there a Big Bang, biologists, where did the first life come from? Is there an expectation that a final answer will or can be found? Or is it just a whole bunch of fun to play around with ideas?
That's a brilliant question. In terms of what caused life here on Earth, I don't think anybody ever thinks we will just have an answer to it, like, oh, it was definitely this. I don't think anybody thinks that because there probably is more than one way to get life. And if we find something's feasible, that doesn't necessarily mean that is what happened here. Now, what we can do is try to figure out like probabilities. And what that's really good for is trying to think about what may happen on other worlds and what are we likely to see on other worlds. That's where there's some potential advantage there. But in terms of understanding exactly how did we come about, again, shy of a time machine, there'd be no way to prove it. It would all be just about probabilities.
So it does continue to be probability. And then in trying to think, okay, we figured out a few theories of how it might start here. Let's find planets that have similar conditions,
Yeah.
look for life there.
Yeah.
The scientists hope in that looking for and finding life, if it's not Star Trek like we really do. What do you feel? What would you, Mohammed, if life was found on another planet, how would it benefit you? Like what would you yeah, tell me what it would make you feel and
Wow. It would
do.
be so cool. Well, so one interesting thing too, when we talk about life, we think about it in well, especially with Star Trek, we tend to see things that look basically like us. But even the things that don't, let's say, for example, the Horta that I mentioned earlier, it's still very clearly alive. It's this big thing that moves around and it's interacting with us in the same sort of time frame we expect and has similar sorts of modes of communication in general, not in a very strict sense. I mean, the analogy I like to use for that sort of thing is the way we define the word game. Okay. When you think about a game, like you think about a certain set of stuff, but imagine that you had only grown up only ever playing, say, Monopoly and Sorry and games like that. So you would define game in the context of, oh, people sit in a circle, there's a board, there's dice, and there's things like that. And that's how you
Space.
would define game. And then somebody shows you solitaire, you'd be like, what is that? It would completely redefine what that means to you. And then somebody later shows you like, you know, some like football game. Again, completely redefines what that means. Since all our life is related, we're basically starting with like Monopoly and having similar games to it. It would be fascinating to see something with a completely different origin and see like, oh, we've not even conceived of what the diversity of life is. We think there's so much diversity of life here on Earth, but it's really not that diverse because everything here on Earth has a water as its solvent, has a carbon backbone for all of its things like carbohydrates, fats, proteins, nucleic acids. It all has inheritance by DNA or some with RNA if you're talking about viruses. It's all fairly similar. If we see something elsewhere, it could be radically different and really reshape what we think about the word life and what we think in the context of what is possible out there.
That is a great answer. And then what it leads me to think about when I think about how humans are so determined to define how we're different and how my group is better than yours. And, I mean, like down to the minutia of difference, even when I was little, I remember we grew up on one street and my name was Anderson. I couldn't keep that name when I became an actress, but um, and there was another Anderson family, like literally two streets over.
Oh,
And sometimes,
my next door neighbors are Andersons.
yeah, the little kids are playing, and they would be like, "You're the good Andersons, they're the bad Andersons," like little kids having to come up with like stories about the other. It was ridiculous. But yeah, it's interesting for me to think if we did find, I would hope that it would expand everyone's brains, and just be like in awe, expand the fact that you say that we're all not that different, even from grass, is I hope that that's the thing, the biological fact that people take away from this episode.
Yeah,
That's
I agree.
fascinating.
Yeah, it
We're
is interesting.
not
Even
that
in the episode, although they're trying to make that message, they still are very anthropocentrized. What's the word?
anthropomorphic or anthropos, yeah.
Anthropocentric. Because they said was that we're all, all of life, humans and kelpians and blah, they like all they listed were humanoids. Like, wait a minute, what about everything else? What about like the trees?
See, I wondered about that because I was going to ask you about all of life. And then I remembered that in that next generation, they said all humanoids. And I was like, well, wait. What about life? What about plants? And
Yeah.
so,
It would have to be all of it, right? Because otherwise, we know we're related to the plants. I mean, we don't know whether we're related to kelpians, but we know we're related to the plants. So it would
now
have to be
that's very
everything.
interesting. Well, you've cleared it up for us then.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
and
That's a
then,
that's a good segue for the last thing too, which was
yeah.
the bacteria that showed up in there. And this was now in episode 2 instead of episode 1.
Was that those big, wait, which
Episode 2 is the
bacteria?
one where they'd shown up on this planet and there was those eyeball things that were shooting at them and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So then
Those,
remember they found on the face, like they said something had been cleared, but on the face they said, oh, there's some iridescent bacteria there. And that was how Saru was able to use his wider optical window to actually see it. I thought that was really
right.
cool.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. They're doing
Yeah.
some cool stuff, I have to say. Um, Well, I love this whole discussion about the biology, and it sets a really great groundwork for the whole series. I mean, the whole season. So we'll talk more and more about it. And so, is that the main things that jumped out at you, biologically
Yeah,
speaking?
that was it for me. I mean, in terms of iridescence specifically, so iridescence, I don't know if people are familiar with that. Iridescence is basically like colors, but it's caused structurally rather than by dyes. And there are some iridescent bacteria out there that does exist, and a lot of animals show iridescence rather than true like color per se, like color from a dye or something like that. So I thought that was interesting that they chose that specifically. And this idea that Saru might be able to see it because, as they said in, I think it was in season 2, they said he has a wider optical window. What that means is he can see further into ultraviolet light. And that is something that, remember, Burnham then said, oh, I'm going to shine this ultraviolet light to then see that better. Like, oh, yeah, that works. Good job. I had nothing to do with it, but it was awesome.
Right. I want to see the iridescence on the sea. People say there's that iridescent algae, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Shows up in the oceans in some places in some seasons.
Yeah. I mean,
Friends and
some people like iridescence. Some people are just more into bioluminescence, the things that basically kind of glow, which is also really fun too. There's like things like anglerfish have little bacteria in their little lure that then
yeah.
will then glow. That's not iridescence, that's more bioluminescence, but it's
Oh,
also
that's
all
bioluminescence. Okay. Well, I've just learned something. That's
yeah,
not,
no, but all of them are cool. Both are cool.
yeah, they're both cool. It's all
Yeah.
cool.
I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on like the new characters we see on Action Saru.
Action Saru is hilarious. I mean, that
That
is
was the best
so
line.
fun.
And some
And
of
it
the
kind of
themes too.
shows you how beloved Doug is, um, that they came up with that name. And I mean, we've talked a lot in previous seasons about the regular cast. I love Sonequa. She just gets better and better. And Doug and, David Ajala, so good. But the new characters, um, Captain Rayner, it's Keith, Calum Keith. I wrote it down.
Alan Keith Rennie, I think.
Callum Keith Rennie and Eve Harlow and Elias Tupexis, is it?
Yeah.
But great characters. I mean, Captain Rayner is wonderful. And I got very upset at the end of, the second episode. I'm like, what are you doing? You can't get rid of this guy. Are you kidding me? He's fantastic. And then Burnham, asked to be number one. And I thought, oh, perfect. What great writers that they did that. I also thought it was hilarious. Shout out to Michelle Paradis for naming Mall because that's the 20s, 30s name for a gangster's girlfriend.
Oh, I didn't know that.
She's my mall. She's what, if you watch old gangster movies, I mean, that felt very intentional, that name. It's hilarious and wonderful. And she's really good. She's so cool looking and very, very good. And Locke, also very good. It makes me instantly think of all the actors who've had to wear all the makeup. And of course, it made me think of Ken. But just shout out to all the actors who act so well through that makeup. Um, but I love those new storylines. Fred, I was sad. Fred, hilarious name, having that guy named Fred, and he was very Cumberbatchian. He was
Yeah.
very much like Benedict Cumber. I mean, looked like that. And then when they killed him, I was like, I was thinking that he was going to be in the whole show, Fred. Um, so I love the actors. I love the things that strike you right away when you watch the show. I mean, the production value, once again, is beyond, beyond, beyond. The design in every department, from set design to computers to props to wardrobe. I mean, just the whole thing is so beautiful. And I keep thinking about, um, especially since you had suggested to me that I do watch The Next Generation as well, that one
Jeez.
episode, The Chase. But it got me thinking, when Picard had to observe that artifact that what was it, the Kurlan Tarquin Hill master had made this artifact. But just the way the actors, the pressure on the prop people to come up with some amazing prop that the actors then have to deal with and be amazed by. Like the way that Picard, he's such a great actor, the way that he just made that artifact so new. And then it reminded me of Anthony having a prop in, I think it was episode one, might have been episode two, that Doug and Sonequa use their real names, Saru and Burnham bring back. The production value is so great, and the
Yeah.
the writing is so great. And I had a funny moment that I noticed directing wise from Olatunde that this is the smallest little moment. It's gonna be like, I can't believe she noticed that, but it was hilarious when Burnham and Book were coming down the hallway, and he had a Tribble in the background go down
Yes.
the wall and fall off the wall. It was hilarious. Like little things like that are very clever, you know. I mean, it's not that, I could say more than that, but I love that. I'm going to look at my notes to see. So I mentioned Maul and Captain Rayner,
Ask
totally
you a
love.
quick question. Did you watch the Battlestar Galactica reboot, the Ronald D. Moore one from 2004, 2009-ish?
No, I
Oh,
haven't
okay.
seen.
Callum
Yeah.
Keith Rennie was in it. He
Oh,
was
I
a
read it.
rather horrible character. Brilliantly portrayed, but he was definitely like he was this sort of semi-religious but actually quite abusive character in there. So
Wow, what a surprise. Yeah.
yeah.
I read up on him because I didn't know him. So when I thought this guy is fantastic, I looked him up and I did see Battlestar Galactica in the credits, but I hadn't seen him in that.
Yeah,
But
his character's name was Leoben. Like, oh, most people are cringe when
maybe I don't want to watch it. No,
they
really, really good actor. I mean, a
very
fine
good
actor.
actor.
And what were some other things? I loved I think it's the end of the first episode. I thought that the Book and Burnham scene was beautifully shot, really, and beautifully directed, allowing them to take the time. A lot of times in American television, it's cut, 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 close up, close up, close up, close up. And I love that, they go to Book when he hears, you know, I can't remember at what point, but maybe he says, is this, just these aren't the lines, this is the end. I think it is. But they're on him and they let him absorb something and think about it. So it's directed well, it's acted well, it's edited well. So that was really great. Um, and what else? What other thoughts did I have? I wrote down like I write down thoughts. This is just for episode one we're talking about, right?
One and two.
Uh, but no, but right now you're asking me questions just
Oh,
what I
for all of them. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So one thing you alluded to this a little bit too in the
we
context of
haven't done the biology for number two yet, have we? Have we done
well,
the
there was I mean that's where the bio or
oh,
the
that's where
luminescent
okay.
bacteria were. Yeah.
So I will go if I go on too long, let me know.
Oh, no, you're great.
Saru and Tarina, I love that scene. I love that the writers, I think they're doing a beautiful job taking universal questions that we all ask, and you can feel that they are asking those questions themselves. They're not just like, so they take a question like life is just a blink. Saru says to Tarina, life is just a blink. I just realized it's just like that. And I don't want to, I mean, it was very moving. And then I think it's the beginning of episode two, they start the whole thing with Sonequa, the Burnham character saying, what is our purpose? Why are we here? What does it all mean? I used to think, and this is shows mature writers because they're talking from a mature place. She says, I used to think it was only the mission, but now I'm not so sure. And when you're in your 20s, you think it's just the mission of like, what are you going to accomplish in life? But as you get older, you do ask the bigger questions, and I love that they're asking these questions, the writers. The action Saru, you've already mentioned, that was hilarious. When they did that long walk, Admiral Vance, who I also love that actor,
Yeah.
and Burnham. But you know how they walked, and then they came around a corner and they walked and they came around a corner? I was watching that and I was like, they came around so many corners, and obviously the set can't be that big, or maybe it is now, but like it was so well done, like the way that they were able to just smoothly keep the way that it was directed, it was really good. The way they kept
Yeah.
doing.
Very impressive.
Uh,
What do you
yeah,
think?
Burnham
What do
and
you think?
Saru.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
you're the bravest soul I've ever known. Um, Saru, I wrote down notes like when she's saying goodbye, and he goes, "In this room, I went from a life of fear to a life of hope." It was beautiful. I mean, it's what we all want, right? Um, yeah. So I think those are my main notes. I think I had another. Yeah, I think those are my main notes. I like the human. I always respond to the human story. I think more than more than the science. Although the minute I start talking about the science with you, I'm fascinated and I put it together because they all come together. You know.
No, it's true. And it was interesting in terms of the human moments. It was interesting to say, for example, the second episode, the action stuff felt like it was most of the episode, but I went back and rewatched it. And actually, the action scenes ended like halfway into the episode. And most of the rest of it was, again, just more character development. That's one thing I actually admire about Discovery. They're not afraid to have like intense character development. Some people are like, Oh man, it's talky, but like actually, I think this is great. Because I
Actually,
actually prefer
great.
that too.
Because they have an opportunity with Star Trek to um, talk about these issues. I was going to say in a global way, but I should say universal way, and they're also able to talk about it in a way that could be heard, because when you have different terrestrial beings and you talk about we're all one, people can watch and be entertained and be like, yes, we're all one. And then they might take that home, which I'm sure is the intention of the writers, and think maybe we should take that message, into our own lives here. But I love it. I love what they're
Yeah.
doing.
How
Yeah.
do you think they did the ball things, the floating balls that were zapping
Uh, well, so much is I'm trying to, okay, so
in episode 2?
in episode 2, do you mean Saru and
Yeah.
Burnham when they were on well, that would have been CG, but that would have been CG, and you just tell the actor where to look and where to
Okay.
put it in later. I could be wrong. I would have to watch it again, but um, I think very little these days is done with like puppetry or real flying props.
Yeah, well, I didn't figure it was flying, but that would be
Yeah.
really cool if it was flying props.
Yeah. Yeah. But actors are told to like you have to look there, you have to look there, and then
That's what I was going to ask. Is like, do you think they were holding like something off like a fishing hook and saying, "Look at this thing"?
yes, they might have done that, and sometimes they put tape on the green screen. What actually impresses me more is how well choreographed throughout all of the episodes. Like Sonequa just goes, and I always
That's right. There's
wondered,
nothing there. Yeah.
yeah, and I always wondered, did they tell her the map is going to look like this, and you need to go like this here, and then you need to swipe this over there? Or does she do something general that makes sense to her, and then they draw it in afterward? Probably the first, because it would cost too much money to.
Mm.
It's much smarter to figure out before what you need to do, and then everybody's on the same page. But I'm more impressed by that. Every single actor has to suddenly, whoop, they have to bring things up in all of the episodes and do stuff. I'm very
I forgot
impressed.
about that. That's an excellent point. That's an
Yeah.
excellent point. Oh,
Thank you.
this is so good. There's so much good stuff. I'm so excited for the rest of the season.
Yeah, too. Me too.
Yeah, they told us ahead of time it's going to be very Raiders of the Lost Ark-ish, and like, yeah, it really comes across as both that quality, which is a fantastic series of movies, as well as the action part to it. But I still love again that they're not afraid to shy away from serious character development. It's not just a like just action, 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 because that would just get I find that exhausting when
I
you
get
watch an
bored with
hour of just
that.
action.
Yeah, I get bored with that after a while. I want to know, who are these people and
Yeah,
how it's affecting them,
why
and
should you care?
okay,
Exactly, right?
doing it. Yeah. So where's their Achilles heel? Because that's the most interesting thing. And that was the other thing. And I'm going to make sure that this is episode, I think it is episode 2.
Yeah, the Achilles heel. You're going about Maul now, right?
We learn about, okay, let me look. Um, I don't want to say anything that's, mm, 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 mm. I just think the Maul character is really interesting. And I think
Very
it's going
excited to get more
I think
backstory on
that
her.
character is going to become more and more interesting as the season goes on. It's going to get more and more like, wait a minute, that's going to be cool. Um, yeah, I think yeah, that's all.
Sounds great. Well, thanks for another wonderful discussion as always. I'm so glad we're doing this again. Thank you for
It's
coming
so
back.
fun. It's so fun. And I learn things too, so it's fun.
Yay, me as well. Well, everybody, thank you for tuning in, and we'll be back in 2 weeks with the next episode discussing episodes 3 and 4 of Star Trek Discovery Season 5, the final season.
Wow.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Left-handed. I would
Oh.
do left-handed. That's me. Bye, everybody.